Welcome back to On the Shoulders of Giants, interviews with Luminaries and Retina. Today we have part 2 of our interview with Dr. Kirk Packo. You know, nothing embodies that more than AAO Subspecialty Day. And I think we can credit you with being the founder of AAO Subspecialty Day. In '93, you started to do was it a pre-meeting before Academy focused on Retina?
Yeah.
And that eventually evolved into Subspecialty Day. Tell us a little bit about that.
It was in 1992. The Academy was going to be in Chicago. There was a pre-meeting a couple years before that. It was the person who came up with the idea of doing a pre-Academy meeting was Travis Meredith, who Travis was my mentor in fellowship. And I owe Travis with a lot, not only how to do vitreous surgery, but just how to be a good doctor and a good person. But this was Travis's idea, and he did it and anticipating that there'd be maybe 200 or 300 people that would show up. And he did it in Buckhead, north of Atlanta, and it was turning people away. He just couldn't fit the people in the room. He finally squeezed about 500 people in the room, but there was another 500 that wanted to be there. And the beauty was financially is he didn't have to pay the way of all these doctors. He just had to ask them to come a day early for it, but they were flying in for the Academy anyway. And so he had about 15 faculty that he was able to put on there and not have to pay, although I think he gave him an honorarium to speak. And then Joe Olk and Hillel Lewis did it for 2 years after that too. And Hillel picked it up and added a lot more people to it. And then again, you know, in me, like the Retina Times magazine, I felt, well, let's go for broke on this one. So I added an exhibit floor again. And it looked exactly like the exhibit floor at the Academy. There was numbers on each aisle. I had about 50 exhibitors, and they were anxious to be there because it was very efficient for them to get in front of all their consumers, their consumer base. And I had 90 faculty and 1,100 people come. I raised just under $1 million in corporate support in 1992. And I was in the black $1,400.
Oh my gosh, it was that close.
It was that close. And my course co-director was my senior partner, Dave Orth. David was popping nitroglycerin tablets like you couldn't believe. And he knew me. I mean, I was his partner, right? And he knew I liked to spend, I liked to think out of the box, and I wanted to do things in a big way. And he was saying, Kirk, you don't need a hologram on the top, on the outside of your syllabus. You don't need that. And I go, yeah, we do. The whole meeting was, it's called New Dimensions in Retina, and it was all stereoscopic. And, you know, those were the days of slides, and we did the stereo viewers, right, when we did things. So I said, well, half the presentations were presented in stereo. We also, now we have, you know, things like Ingenuity and other companies that do the heads-up 3D surgery, you know, which is 25 years later. But back then, there was a surgical 3D system too. It was made by Zeiss. And we got the cameras called MediLive from Zeiss. It was analog systems then, big tube televisions, not the flat screens hadn't even been invented yet. But we sent the cameras around to surgeons who had a particular procedure that they were doing. Macular hole surgery was brand new. And so Bert Glazer was doing some with TGF beta, that was his kick. Submacular surgery, brand new. So Matt Thomas was taking out some neovascular membranes in stereo. Translocation surgery, brand new. All these kinds of things. So I sent the cameras to the different surgeons a year before the meeting. They sent me all their raw tapes because I had to edit everything because I had to edit it in stereo. And I had these very expensive glasses that were $1,000 a pair to view in stereo. And I'll tell you just as an aside, I got such a big kick out of seeing the raw footage from beginning to end, not just the 30 seconds that you're going to show, because I learned things like how people, like why Gene Dewan opened his conjunctiva the way he did, I couldn't understand, um, or just the little things I learned so much from. Um, but anyway, so so then we presented all this in stereo. We had a stereo theater with these very expensive glasses. We had 30 pairs at $1,000 a pair set up for that. I had to buy a special silver screen to maintain the polarization in the main projection room, which cost me $60,000 just for the screen, which I had to buy. And no one could rent this thing to me. So basically, that's why I spent close to $1 million. My audio visual budget was over $400,000 just for AV because of us. We had to triple project our projectors to get enough light to get it bright because of the polarization on it. And then the rest of it I gave back to the people. And that's why let's put a hologram on the cover. We had a wonderful gala dinner at the Shed Aquarium, and we showed Creature from the Black Lagoon in the original 3D version from 1956. So we made the poster, the Retina that ate my brain, and the T-shirt and stuff. So people had a great time. And 2 years ago, a person comes up before the pandemic, a person comes up to me. I was doing a presentation at the Academy, and after the symposium was done, this guy chases me down. He was from Brazil. And he said, no, Dr. Packo, please, a minute. And he said, the last time I was in Chicago was at your meeting, this stereo meeting. And he even showed me a letter that I had sent him, dated 1992, thanking him for registering. It was a handwritten, hand-signed letter. Thank you for coming to the meeting in another 3 months from now. And he was so impressed with the meeting, he kept this letter. So it was just fun to see that. But so everybody regarded this meeting as this huge success that 25 years later, people are still chasing me down to thank me for it. But the person who got the attention more than anybody was the AAO. And I was standing in the hallway right before watching the thing take place, and the Academy came by, and the head of the annual meeting, who worked for the Academy, a non-physician, was standing there with his entourage, and he was looking at not only the 1,100 people that were in the room watching this, but he pointed out the exhibit floor and all of the money that was on the exhibit floor. And more importantly, he pointed to my coat check area where all of the bags were packed for people who checked their bags because they were flying out that afternoon. So they had come for the 2 days of my meeting and then were going home. And it should have gotten their attention because that was a time when the Academy didn't really pay a lot of attention to subspecialists. And yet 80% of the teachers at the Academy were subspecialists. So they were doing all the teaching, but it was geared really for the general ophthalmologist. And so they said, no, we can't allow this, and we're going to take it over. And there was a push to still do it, and we could have done it, at O'Hare, where the Academy wouldn't have prevented us from doing it there. And there was other places we could have done it, but at that point, it wasn't worth the battle. The purpose was we needed education once a year for the subspecialist in a way that was real down and dirty, but orchestrated. Okay, not a free abstracts like the annual meeting of the societies would do. This was something that is an update. It's the cliff notes of Retina needed to be there once a year, and it should have been the Academy. So we started a series of meetings, and that's when the subspecialty day was born. And they decided to, and one of the things we said is, well, let's shorten the annual meeting a day, and let's make it, and let's not only do retina, let's do everything. So that's how we were instrumental in helping gear them through that. And they're actually changing it again. The Academy is going to get even another day shorter next year. And so again, the things that put smiles on my face, John, I mentioned seeing the PAT survey, taking the PAT survey, seeing the Retina Times magazine, watching the film festival, these little things. But the joy of going to subspecialty day and seeing, how that's happened and how it changed and how it came from, a fun meeting that almost put my partner in the hospital. He was so worried about it. But it was a fun evolution to see it.
Speaking of Academy, I will never forget that 2005 meeting in New Orleans. And I was in that room. It was my first Academy as a retina specialist. And I was in that room when you gave that infamous talk. Things were so contentious at the time between Genentech and retina specialists.
It was in tribute to what the society was doing. The society had stepped to the plate and had an Avastin workforce to try to continue to get access for the drug. And Genentech really knew that they had blown it. And hey, look, business is business. They looked at this threat, and there was more than a few dollars on the table here. They had already invested an enormous amount of money in developing Lucentis, and they had done it very honestly. They had felt with their work on Herceptin that Avastin wasn't going to work, and then when it turned out that it was, and they couldn't reel back, they really felt that they wanted to try to put some roadblocks there. And actually, right before that Academy meeting, if you remember, they had actually officially stopped access. They were not going to sell it to compounding pharmacies. And we stepped to the plate for that. And Susan Desmond Hellman was the CEO of Genentech at that point. And she was an oncologist by trade, and she was invited to give her side. She knew she was, at least she thought she knew, she was stepping into the lion's den to give her presentation, but maybe not to the extent that as it turned out. But people were upset, and the room was packed. There was at least 5,000 or more people in the room wanting to hear Genentech's side of it. And because I was the president of society and the head of the Avastin task force, I got the draw to speak it. And actually, Dave Williams, actually, I should say, was the head of the task force, but I was the one who was asked to debate, if you will, the CEO. And I pointed out a whole series of things that Genentech was doing that was building this distrust between ophthalmology and their company. And I turned to her, and I was showing in PowerPoint the wall being built brick by brick, higher and higher and higher, and with Genentech on one side and ophthalmology on the other. And I pointed to her and turned right to her as she was about to take the podium. And I said, tear down this wall. It's your job to do this. And it's the only standing ovation I ever got as a speaker. That was the voice of their anger. And people leapt to their feet, cheering. And it took a long time for the cheers to subside as she stood there waiting to speak and tried to get out of it. But she realized that it wasn't happening. So that was the end of November. And they very soon after the meeting came to the ASRS, not to the Academy, but they came to the ASRS and said, okay, let's meet. Let's talk this over. And he was the head of the Senate Subcommittee on Aging. And Senator Cole got involved in this. And he sent a subpoena to Genentech saying, you're going to come in before the U.S. Senate and explain this too, right after that meeting. I got a subpoena for my PowerPoint, but I sent that to them and I talked with Senator Cole about it. And then right after that, we met with Genentech with a special thing. And it was actually a great meeting because we said, look, no one's wanting to crucify you guys. You guys are a phenomenal company. Look at the wonderment of what you created. You created Avastin. You created Lucentis. You're doing all this great stuff. We just need to figure out how to do this. And then it was right before Christmas is when they came out with the letter that was actually sent out by the ASRS to everybody, saying that we've met with Genentech, and Genentech is, and tried to tell them correctly that Genentech, don't vilify these people, don't demonize them. They're giving us great tools, and let's just put this behind us. And years later, maybe the young people don't realize that fight and how contentious it got. And they're still doing great stuff. So, and they spur other people and other companies to do great stuff. And that's why, again, it's the same thing. We need these people. And they need us. And we just need to make sure we're not at each other's throat.
I think about that talk and just how powerful that was, and how that really not only brought together retina specialists in one unified way to fight for Avastin, but it changed Genentech as a company. I think that's when Genentech finally woke up and said, wait a second, we've got to work with these people. And Avastin and Lucentis can coexist, and patients can be made better if we just back off and let this happen and let it play out.
And even I enjoyed working with them. I never really was a speaker for them, but if there's one person who was on their list, it was me. And just because of that and leading the company, we had other ideas that were ready to go at that meeting that would even been worse than my talk, that thankfully we didn't get involved with, but all sorts of stuff we were going to do, that we were on a quest to win. And there was no question that we were going to do that. But Genentech realized, look, everybody's entitled to make a mistake, and there's a lot of money there, and I understand it. So, but you're right, they really did understand it, and again, driven by great people. But soon thereafter, Tony Adamus got involved with the company. Tony is a great guy, both scientifically but ethically too, and he understands the need to have a symbiotic relationship with your consumer base.
100%. You've developed this passion for the history of the retina and our profession, and you've kind of carried that torch. Your talk on the history of retina is the gold standard. What is it about the history that makes you so passionate about that and telling that story? And who's going to carry that torch, Kirk, when you're gone?
The statement, if you don't know history, you're damned to repeat it. And it gives you such an appreciation for your craft and how you got from point A to point B. Little things like, I love asking medical students how they treated diabetic retinopathy at the turn of the century. And it's a trick question because diabetic retinopathy didn't exist at the turn of the century because everybody who got diabetes died before they could develop retinopathy. So diabetic retinopathy was a new disease. And if you look at journals and reports, this new disease started being described within 5 to 10 years after Banting and Best invented insulin. And what was the first thing that they blamed when they saw all of this unusual vasculopathy developing? They blamed insulin. They said, well, insulin's the cause of this, not the fact that people are just living longer and developing this. So again, it shocks you into thinking that nothing is the stuff is not intuitive, and it just didn't happen this way. And it's so marvelous to learn those kinds of stories, um, to get an appreciation for it. It also allows you to build on it and learn to develop new things. And some things, I guess, is just the romantic in me that feels that we should remember people. Um, in the past several cycles, I've asked my fellows as they come in who Robert Mockemer was, and they don't know, and uh, and that hurts. And then for me to ask other names in the next tier who Jules Gonan was, or who Carl Lidner was. So Carl Lidner was, and a contemporary with Gonan, was actually developed more of our profession than Gonan. And how did I learn that? I read an oral history by Dorman Pichel, who was the chair at UCSF for many years, and he had the Pichel pins that would impale in the eye with diathermy to treat retinal detachments that way. And it's a wonderful, you can read it in one night, published by the Academy. It's online for free. But when he tells a story of how he would go over and was in Gonan's living room watching him do his surgery. And what actually did Gonan do? To hear from Pichel's voice as he's telling you this is just, I just get shivers with that. And so that's why I love to share that with people. And you're right, because history should be just a recounting of facts. And in fact, there's facts in there, but they usually are interpreted in the mind of the person who's telling you the story. And there may be a lot of embellishment. There may be things that are downright incorrect in there. So you want to try and make it as correct as you can. And we've lost some wonderful people of late. Harvey Linkoff is no longer with us. George Hilton, Robert Mockemer, and more people who gave us our tools and our way of thought and our instruments and things are not going to be around. And it's nice to be able to catalog that. So we're on a wonderful project again that John Pollock is the main driver behind. We're creating a whole new section within the ASRS of not only doing oral histories, but actually histories of different techniques, vitrectomy, buckling, things like that, and people who lived through the evolution. We're developing a museum. All these instruments are just going to get thrown out in dumpsters. Thankfully, we're trying to salvage some and keep them so that we'll have a traveling shows of different instruments that we can bring to meetings, so that people can see what a vitrector looked like in 1972. Or I actually found a Packlin cautery on eBay from Belgium that I donated to the museum, which is exactly what Gonan used. Gonan's instruments actually don't even exist anymore, but in his museum in Lucerne, Switzerland, they have a Packlin cautery, and I found one on eBay. So again, I was just like a kid in a candy shop when I saw this on eBay that I bought for like $150. And it's like the very first retinal surgery instrument for a procedure that worked. It's so much fun to see that. So yeah, you got to, and it has to be this society. They have to be the custodian of our history, and they have to try to get it right, and to try to do it without hurting people, because there's some dirt in there, and there's some bad things that happened, and people stealing ideas and lawsuits and all that kind of stuff. But it is what it is, and you got to put it down and let history just make sure that it's correct. I'll tell you one little story that was going to be one of my tickets to heaven is how gases got FDA approved. When we were using gases, SF6 and C3F8 and things, and they were industrial gases. They're really inexpensive. You could buy them in these giant tanks that would last forever. SF6, for example, was sold by the ton in the electronics industry as they call it an electrical blanket, because when they would make microchips or in transformers and things, you needed to put an atmosphere in there that wouldn't corrode or oxidize these delicate workings. So SF6 was a common thing to do it. So you could buy this stuff. And there was a time when we lost access to SF6 and C3F8. The PCR company in Gainesville, Florida, had nothing to do with the PCR genetics test, but that's just the name of their company. They were one of the biggest suppliers that we bought gases from, and they were an industrial company. They did not sell medical grade things, but that's where everybody bought their gases. And there was a woman who sued the PCR company, claiming that she got hepatitis from the SF6 that was injected into her eye. And they had to defend this lawsuit that was ultimately dropped. But they said, look, we're not a medical company. We don't want to do this. So they sent out a letter to every ophthalmologist saying that they will not sell it to anyone who is a doctor. They won't sell it to a hospital. And people who were buying this had to send them an affidavit saying that they will not inject it into the human or animal eye. Okay, they got animals covered too. So we lost our access to it. And a couple of the other companies like Matheson Gas and a couple others, they all followed suit with PCR. So now I had a tank of these in the operating room that I had bought, just like everybody else. And one of my colleagues who was not in my group, but was operating at my private hospital, wanted to use my SF6. And the scrub nurse called me in the office and said, Dr. So-and-so wants to use your gas. Is that okay? And I didn't know how much gas was left in the tank. I couldn't buy it anymore. I didn't know if he was going to know how to open it or just leave it open at the end of the day. And I felt bad, but I said, look, I really can't allow it. I'm so really sorry, but you're going to have to tell him that I'm going to decline. So then 2 days later, I get a call from the president of the hospital saying that he was informed that I was using a non-FDA approved gas in the hospital, and what am I doing? And I'm holding the hospital at jeopardy. So he turned me in because he was angry. So I explained the whole situation. He said, well, Kirk, look, why don't you do an IRB thing? We'll just let you do it. So then over a weekend, I wrote the IRB study, and I had, 100 references, and had this 30-page paper that I'd written, in a typical Packo way, being over the top, where I had this big document that on why gases would still be allowed. And when I did it, I said, well, this is still stupid. I mean, we got to get the gases. And I was on a committee called the New Device Committee at that point. I was just early on. It was long before I was president. And I used my role in that committee to see if we could find somebody. So I sought out Scott Medical, who was providing gases or was about to provide the gases for the silicone oil study. They were an anesthesia company. And so they purified the C3F8 and SF6 for the study, but they had no intention of selling it or marketing this. They thought it was going to be a big deal and that kind of stuff. And so I remember meeting with the president of the company at the Algonquin Hotel in New York. I flew to New York on my dime to meet with the guy. And I tried to convince him, and I handed him my paper. And I says, look, I've talked with the FDA. They're not going to require a study. And he says, here's the PMA application. All you got to do is fill in the blanks, and you can market this. And I told him there's a market here. So he kind of reluctantly agreed to do it. And then he quit, and I had to start over with another CEO, and then I actually started over with a third CEO, and finally got them all through it. I wrote the package insert for them with Gary Abrams. Gary and I did it. We tried to get them to have it for vitreous used too. But if you look at the original package insert back then, they had it approved for pneumatic retinopexy. And it was contraindicated for use in vitreous surgery, which was weird. So we were using it off label in the operating room. And even when it was presented to the FDA, they said, "Why did you do it this way?" He said, "We'd have given you the package approval for everything if you just did it that way." And I forget the name of the person at the FDA, and it wasn't Dr. Chambers, so it wasn't Wiley, it was because he was more on the drug side. But and this was approved as a device, interestingly, because it wasn't metabolized in the body, and it left the body unchanged. So it was on the device side of things. They don't do it that way anymore, but at that time it was. And I said, well, I tried to tell Scott not to do it that way, but I was afraid I was going to lose him. So that's the way it turned out. So, but all this happened at lightning speed. So within a month of me being turned in, we had the FDA approval for it.
Wow.
And no, maybe a couple months, because I ran through a couple of CEOs. But the end of the story was, as soon as it was FDA approved, I get a phone call from the medical staff office again, saying that there was a doctor on staff who wanted to know where to buy it because they heard that it was now FDA approved. So I wish I could say I wore a halo at that moment, but I didn't.
Yeah.
And I told him, "Tell Dr. So-and-so it's a cold day in hell if I'm going to tell him where to buy it."
Yeah.
I was so upset. Maybe I've softened since then. Maybe I would have told him where to get it. But that little historical vignette is kind of fun. And it shows that it's the anger of one competitor to another that actually facilitated our access to the gas. And again, I love to tell it because it really is my ticket to heaven, because I didn't get a dime for any of that day. Scott Medical didn't pay me for doing anything, for consulting with them. I just wanted to get it done. And it was really my job on the then Vitreous Society to get it out and get us to it. So, and it was kind of proving myself to the board that I was able to do some things positively for the society.
Well, Kirk, I hope that the next time anybody goes to ASRS, fills out a PATH survey, picks up a Retina Times, or uses gas, that they think in some way this is in part thanks to Kirk Packo.
You know, John, it's nice to hear you say that. It is in no way why I did any of that.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's not just for me to say it as part of a blog or interview here. Truly, it's not why I did it. And same way I feel about education. You know, if someone asks me if they want to borrow a slide from my talk, I always refuse. And I say, the only way you're going to get it is if you let me give you the whole talk, and you'll get everything. And please use it. And some people always want to, you know, say, you know, I'm not going to give it to you because you got to credit me for it. You know, education is meant to be shared. These things are meant to be shared. And my joy in it and my thanks is, like I've told you, when I go see how those things have grown and evolved, that's all I need.
Wonderful. Kirk, listen, I so appreciate you coming on, being our first guest on this. You set the bar incredibly high, as you have in so many different ways. But thank you so much for joining us tonight. And I look forward to seeing you at many, many more meetings. A meeting without you at it. I hope you keep presenting at these meetings, even though you're retired, because a meeting without you is a meeting that's just missing something.
Oh, you're sweet to say that. As long as I got a breath, John, I'm going to be there, and not only presenting but learning. It's the joy of learning things, even though I may not actually put it into clinical practice. I may teach it to someone in some capacity in the future. And if that doesn't happen, just the fact that I learned something that day just makes it a worthwhile day.
Fantastic. Thanks, Kirk.
Thanks, John.
I want to thank you so much for listening to On the Shoulders of Giants, interviews with luminaries in retina. This interview with Dr. Kirk Packo has been so meaningful and impactful.